From Prison to Peer Work, brought to you in partnership with the Pursue It If You Want It nonprofit organization. Join us as we explore these powerful narratives that not only highlight the struggles, but also celebrate the victories of individuals who have used their past as a stepping stone to build a promising future. We delve deep into the lives of individuals who have turned their experiences into powerful stories of success through the strength of resilience and peer support. Stay tuned for episodes that promise to be as enlightening as they are inspiring.
Warning, these videos are uncensored and unrehearsed.
All right. Welcome back to another installment of From Prison to Peer Work. Only this time, your boy's in the hot seat, right? So LaTonya here is going to interview me about my life. I know a lot of you have asked for this particular story. Again, the questions are generated randomly, and it is what it is. So introduce yourself.
All right. Thank you, B. Thank you for inviting me to be here in this space and being able to interview you. It's definitely a pleasure and honor. My name is LaTonya Rogers, and I am a certified peer counselor. And I had a great opportunity to be able to be in community and spaces with this awesome gentleman. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. I'm ready.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get it started. So I know we've been having conversations, but I was looking over this and I wanted to just start off with asking you some questions around, can you describe around your childhood and growing up in Hawaii with a military dad?
So like my dad was military. He was a Marine. I was born in Hawaii, so I don't have a lot of conscious memories. A lot of my memories from Hawaii were stories told to me about me. Right, we've lived in like North Carolina, California, New York. You know, I do remember a lot about New York. I went to elementary there, and childhood was a lot of moving around, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of just being in different spaces and experiencing different cities and different things. It wasn't a lot of like consistency in where we were at.
Mm-hmm. So you shared about moving around. So talk a little bit about how did your family move from Hawaii to New York and then in Lacey, and how did that impact you?
So my parents were still together from Hawaii to New York, and I think in between my little brother was born in California, so we lived there for a bit. In New York, one of the biggest transitions for me was like school, the curriculum, the change. And like when I was in New York, I was what they call gifted, but on the West Coast, gifted meant something different. It meant like literally the opposite, right? So the transition to Lacey was a huge culture shock, first and foremost. Like I wasn't used to it. I hadn't really experienced racism up to that point, and as far as like how kind of blatant it was, like my accent being made fun of and things like that wasn't until I came to Lacey.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the influence that it had on your older brother being involved in the Paru gang. How did that affect you? And I think that was a time when you were living in California.
No, that was actually in the Northwest. That was when we moved out here. So by then, my parents had already been split up. My mom moved up to Washington to Lacey following two of her sisters.
Okay.
So, you know, she came out here, and my little brother was going through, he had broke his femur bone. And so my mom was actually going back to New York to deal with that case. So she left us up here with her mom, and my mom's West Indian, you know, and they come from that corporal punishment era. So she would whoop our ass, beat our ass, lock us out of the house. Like it was traumatic growing up with just her. And so my brother was my, you know, that's who I idolized in that space. Like, you know, we didn't have our dad around, and my brother got in with the homies in the neighborhood. That's just That's what they were on. That's what he was on. So I was willing to do anything to be accepted and to like be around my older brother. And so that kind of is what led to the Pyru gang involvement.
Okay. All right. So can you discuss a little bit more around the decision, your experience that you were feeling related to your suicidal ideation when you were a youth?
Yeah, so I remember there was times where like being the middle child and my older brother would get all the all this attention, and even when he was going to juvie, my mom drugged me and my little brother, forced us to like go visit him and stuff like that. And then there were times where like when I got in trouble, that wasn't the case. Or there were times where I was getting into it with my mom, and they were she would say things like all this shit was like my fault. Like I felt like there was a burden placed on me for like moving around, evictions, and things like that. So, there were some times where I felt like, and maybe I was throwing that out there for attention. I wanted to live with my dad, but that wasn't an option at the time. And then my little brother, he was the golden child, so he was a baby. My older brother like couldn't do no wrong, even when he was doing wrong. And so it was like I was literally like that textbook middle child kind of syndrome, like not young enough to be babied and not the firstborn, so I wasn't getting that particular attention. And it just highlighted the fact that I remember when we did visit my dad, I was really attached, to my dad, and he remarried and was living in California.
So can we talk a little bit about your first arrest when you were 12?
Yeah, so I was in Lacey. I was going to elementary school, Lydia Hawk, and my little brother was in the same school. He was probably like first grade. I think I was sixth grade, fifth or sixth grade. We were walking home. Two kids from a middle school, had like pushed up on us and was, you know, talking that shit, making fun of us. And I remember telling my little brother to run home, and I had a Swiss Army knife on me. So that it got to the point where they was like being aggressive. I'm from New York, so I'm like y'all gonna jump me, like it's not gonna be easy. So as the altercation kind of got to feeling like they was gonna pick on me to the point of physical, I used the Swiss Army knife with all the little gadgets on it. I popped one of the gadgets open, and I remember it wasn't even the knife that I popped open; it was a panic move, right? And I grabbed it in a headlock and held it up to him and told his partner, like, "Man, I'm gonna cut his throat. Like, get away from me." I made him create distance, and then the next day I go to school, and I remember they called me to the office, and I walk in the office, and two grown cops like slam me down like I was grown, threw cuffs on me, and then my older brother, he had already been in, so they're like, "Yeah, we're gonna lock you up just like your brother. You going where he went, and all this." And they took me to juvie. Didn't contact my mom for hella hours. It was like it was crazy. It was
Sounds
madness.
really
Like it
traumatic.
was, yeah, hella traumatic for sure. It was one of those. I think that was like the seed of like hatred, like that was put in me at a young age, because I walked around with that hatred for so many years, and I acted on it in all of my actions.
Yeah. Can we move into you describing and talking about that experience of being charged as an adult and serving 11 months in that juvie?
Yeah, so about 15 or 16. And I was heavily in the game, heavily in the gang life, doing the most. And some guys had like robbed me for some weed, and then we retaliated on them. So like the chick had called me over to her house, talking about her cousins wanted some weed. I walk into a bunch of dudes, and it was like a couple ounces or whatever. So they took it. I got with my bros. We met back up, went over there, and had her set them back up. So it was like now she's calling us, whispering, telling us, "Yeah, they're over at my house now." It was like a week or so later, and so we went in the house, and a physical altercation happened. Somebody went through a floor. Somebody ran to the nearest bowling alley and like called the police. And long story short, we ended up with some like charges that when I tell you, you'll be like, "What?" So the charges that we ended up with for that incident, because the girl refused to tell her mom that she let us in.
Okay.
So that is where the burglary one charge came from. And then she called us like she had made them food. So they were like, when we like, she escorted us down the hallway and they were in her room in this house. When we got into the room and did our little exchange, like, what's up now type shit, right? What y'all want to do? Like, some of them were eating. So, like, the fight broke out. A plate got broke on somebody's head. Somebody, like, fell in the closet and was getting stomped on. And that floor, the wood was weak. It wasn't like we broke a house, you know what I mean? But the floor gave out and they fell into the basement. And the plate being broke, the prosecutors in Thurston County used that to charge us with assault one with a deadly weapon and called the deadly weapon a dinner plate. So we were charged with burglary one, 4 individual counts of assault two with deadly weapon. And yeah, and I was charged in adult. And it's obviously like years later, I found out that the whole process wasn't legal.
Yeah.
You know, I ended up doing adult time. I went to Clallam Bay in what they call the YOP program at the time. So I was in Clallam Bay in an adult prison. Ironically, my brother was in the adult side of it. So, yeah, that was insane. Again, adding to my anger and the fact that, like, why couldn't we just, like, at best, it's assault 4, right?
Yeah.
We got into a fist fight. That's all it was. There was no guns involved in that particular situation, but to maximize the punitive nature of, and we were all young, under 17-year-old black kids, you know what I'm saying? They wanted to max us out, and they did, you know? So I ended up with adult charges at 16 for a fist fight.
Yes. Thank you for willing to share that. So let's switch and talk a little bit about, you were married when you were pretty young.
Yeah.
And you had your first child.
Yeah.
How young were you?
18.
Okay.
And I mean, we were married in the county. I was it was in the county during my preliminary stages when I was facing 10 plus years.
Okay.
And she was already pregnant. And so, yeah, we did back then. It was real easy to get the ordained minister and get the paperwork all done and notarized while you were in the county doing the thing. And so that's kind of how that marriage unfolded.
So let's talk a little bit more about that. You, at this point, you were serving 11 years in prison. Talk about how that impacted your relationship with your first wife and your child.
So there was a time where I bailed out for like 3 months, so I was there for my daughter's actual birth and the first like 3 months of her life. And then there were some circumstances behind, like I was going to trial. It was just one of those hard-headed things we did when we were young, knowing we was wrong. But it was one of those things where it's like, if you charged me according to what I did, I probably just would have pled guilty. But they tried to create this extensive crime out of something that wasn't that. It's like walking into a store, stealing a candy bar and getting caught. And you're like, yeah, I stole the candy bar. I'll take whatever punishment, whatever. But they're like, no, we're going to charge you with robbery with a gun. Even though you didn't have a gun, even though that's not what it was. So I have to go to trial because all I did was steal a candy bar, right? So that's kind of what, in a nutshell, was going on. Like, they could have charged this, but they charged this.
Okay.
And so I went in after, I had got caught because I went to like day 1 of trial, kind of, and just didn't go back to the second day. So they ended up doing like a fugitive fled from justice warrant, found me guilty without me there. And then when they caught me, it was basically sentencing, and they gave me 132 months at 18 years old, which 11 years. And a lot of that time was gun enhancement. So essentially I had like 9.5 years, even after good time, to do straight. And so, I was appealing because of the circumstances of the charges. And yeah, my wife left before my first appeal even came back. And so and then the relationship with my daughter during that time was like hit or miss. There was extensive periods of that 9 years where I didn't even see her or know where to write her. And the funny thing is, one of my brothers had got out and was I remember, man, like it was yesterday. He was getting his hair braided. It had been probably a couple of years since I even talked to her, and so I had talked to his baby's mom, and she was like, "Call back tomorrow. Your brother's getting out." And so when I called him the next day from Walla Walla prison, he was getting his hair braided by my ex-wife, and up to that point, she had been portraying like we were good and chopping it up and all this. So he's on the phone with me like, "Yeah, man, your BM, your boo's braiding my hair." And I'm like, "My what? Oh, you don't know?" So I was so angry about that because it's like, at least stand on it. If you're going to leave your dude in there, at least stand on it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Lots of things that were, emotions were going on right there. I can imagine. Yeah.
And 9 years is a long time. So again, there was times where I did get visits, or it got to a point where she was allowing other people, like when I went from Walla Walla to McNeil Island when it was in Tacoma, she came a couple times and then didn't, and then allowed like my mom or my little brother, or I had homegirls that were willing to go get my daughter and bring her up.
Okay.
So.
Okay. So we talked about your 11 years you shared with that, and then your marriage. And then you went through and then you experienced, explain some of the circumstances that led up to you being reincarcerated for 41 days after your initial release.
Yeah, that's so I get out and I'm thinking I'm doing everything right, and I'm sure this will come up. So I end up reconnecting with a childhood friend whose her husband had passed away probably at that time, maybe 3 or 4 years prior to that. And we kind of connected again and was talking, and we ended up getting married like right away, right?
Okay, so this is your second wife.
So this is my second wife.
Okay.
And I remember I had got my license, like I was feeling hella good about it because I never had my license. I've been in prison my whole life.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a suspended one. I just had to go do the steps. So I got my license, got insurance. My older brother had given me access to a car. And then my homeboy called me and he was like, "Hey man, I need a ride. I got this court date. I can't drive because the court date's for driving." And he's like, "You could drive my new Beamer and just give me a ride." So I go to his house, park my car, get in his Beamer. I'm taking him to court, and on the freeway, a car sideswipes us, just a regular, normal accident. And we pull into the median where you get off the freeway. There's like a space because it was like right at an exit. They came into like they missed their exit, right? And we like scraped. So I pulled in. I go to the window and I'm like, "Hey, you good? Everything okay?" Da 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 da. And I'm like, "Hey, there's this AMPM right off the exit. I'm taking my man's to court, like right down the street from the AMPM. Let's meet at the AMPM if everything's all good and we can get off this freeway, exchange information." So I do that. While we're passing the AMPM, something tells me, I'm like, "Let me call," right? So I call dispatch, explain the situation, tell them where we agreed to meet the AMPM and all that. It's literally down the street from the court. So I get him the court still on time, go back to the AMPM. 9 minutes has passed since the accident, the call, and being back at the AMPM. We pulled up. The person that got in the accident is there. Staters pull up, and mind you, they had forwarded me to the stater who responded. So I'm talking to him on the phone.
Okay.
Pull up. We get out. The lady's like, "That's my fault. I'm so sorry." All the shit, all the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The cop's talking. He's listening to her say this to me. And my partner James is in the passenger seat or whatever. And so he's there. And then he's like, yeah, like, whatever, not saying much. And the cop gets my ID, runs my name. And I'm like, I remember I'm facing James, and then he just grabs me, and I like karate stand. So I'm like, "Oh, what are you doing?" Like, snatch my do-rag off, and arrested me for felony hit and run is what the charges were. And by then, my points are off the scale. So I'm looking at minimum 60 months at this point, just for that bogus ass hit and run.
Mm. And that was 41 days.
41 days after I got
Wow.
out. So I'm on bail for that. And it was during the time of the Percocet 30.
Yeah.
Somebody had given me a handful and I had them in a wallet. Right. My older brother asked me to go and do him a favor at this girl's house. And I'd already been there with him and she wasn't home. I think he was collecting or something, right? So he's got me working with him at the car lot. I go there, and mind you, I'm on bail for this hit and run now.
Yeah.
I get to this house, knock on the door. The lady's not there. I walk in. Her roommate says, "Yeah, you can wait for so and so. She'll be here in a minute." They raid the house. So now I'm sitting on bail. I got these 8 pills I totally forgot about, and I end up getting possession of 8 oxycodones.
Mm.
So I don't get bail.
Your timing. Your timing.
Yeah,
Mm.
all this within that 41-day period. And now, because it's happened on bail and I was on DLC, it was no bail.
Mm.
And so I ended up doing 24 months right
Okay.
after doing 9.5 years.
So let's talk about what challenges did you start facing with your second marriage, and particularly concerning around the drug use?
So one thing is I went into that with my eyes wide open. You know,
Mhm.
she was a friend of mine prior. You know, we had a little connection. We got together. We were doing the thing, and there was a lot of times where she wanted to stop, and she tried and tried, and then
So we're speaking of her drug use.
yeah,
Choice, choice of choice. Okay.
yeah, her substance
Substance
use,
Thank you.
and so you know, it got to a point where she like was like, I don't want to be sober, like I just know, and at this point, I'm like in the game, being a shitbag, you know, I'm having little other relationships and things like that, and it just kind of escalated from there.
So how did that affect your emotional status and your feeling, and mentally? How did that affect that after that second marriage divorce?
I think I came home cold
Mm.
already. And so like even entering into our relationship, I think it was more the idea of like getting out and being married, right?
Mhm.
And not really thinking about it, just acting on impulse, acting on what felt right in the moment, because that's like what we did. Like we met after like 7 days or 3 or 4 days after I got out. Someone had brought me around, like, "Hey man, you remember?" You know, I'm like, "Hell yeah, where's she at?" You know, and we linked up, and then we were in a hotel for like 4 days, and then we decided in that space to get married.
Okay.
So I got introduced to her kids as her about to be husband, you
Okay.
know? And so, and in my mind, like I was all in. I was like, all right, well, if that's what it is, I'm going to embrace, you know, these kids as my own. Like this is what we're doing.
His father
It is what it
figure.
is. And
Okay.
so, yeah, but I think relationship wise, I was cold. I lacked tools to, I don't know, I shouldn't have been in a relationship. Looking back, it's easy to say now. Maybe back then I would have argued all those points like it's your fault. Da, 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 da. You know, I had all those arguments, but at the end of the day, I wasn't healed. I wasn't in a good space.
So what were some of the significant lessons that you learned during your times in prison that you could share?
Well, I could say one thing that really stands out is my journey into psychology that was based on myself. So I remember growing up and being told I was like oppositional defiant disorder, or um, you know, I had an anger problem. I was an intermittent explosive disorder, and like all these different things where I had school counselors and family counselors and different diagnoses, right? And when I was in prison, I spent a lot of time doing correspondence courses for psychology, and I like made the president's list. I always been smart, right? Like that was never the problem. It was emotional issues that was creating the choices and the decisions I was making. It was that not feeling connected and wanting to be a part of something that put me in that space of like acting ignorant, you know? But one thing prison did teach me was like really digging into like learn about myself and decide like I'm not those things, or I don't have an anger problem if I don't want one. Like choosing to identify with being an angry person or some other emotion that I wasn't able to deal with, so I was just looking for tools.
Okay. Yeah, that's very important to think about. I want to talk about, what kind of supports did you have, or did you have any supports during those periods of when you were incarcerated after you came home?
So when I was locked up for the long stretch, like I've said, there were times where I literally went years with minimal to no like contact or letters from significant people in my life. Like my mom was always there; she would visit, but being at Walla Walla when your family's in Lacey, it was like the 3 years I was there before I was transferred.
Yeah.
I had less than 5 visits,
And you were transferred
I
to,
was transferred the first time I left Walla Walla and was transferred to McNeil, which was back in Tacoma. So I was there for about 2 years of the 9.
okay.
And then when I promoted to camp, they actually shot me back to the other side of the mountains, which they promote that they want to transition you close to your family. And I'm like, I'm already here. Why would you send me back to the east side?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, I remember it was a struggle. It was a struggle.
Yeah. So let's talk about more into your supports. But what has it been like? What's the most challenging things, aspects of rebuilding your life after the multiple incarcerations?
Challenging aspects was probably be like knowing that like I didn't compromise my criminal persona, like I didn't do that, so I could always get back in the game. Knowing that a phone call away could fix a lot of my monetary problems, but also knowing that it wasn't worth it. And so by creating a space where I'm accountable not only to my family but also the community, by making myself a public figure, by going live a lot. So a lot of people think it's for attention, but the secret to my going live from the time I got out until now and sharing my story,
Yes.
it's checks and balances for me, because the more people I'm accountable to, the more I have to lose, the harder it is to even think about going back. Like I don't even think about making any phone calls that would jeopardize what I have, because I have pride for where I am in life right now.
So it sounds like these are also some steps that you've done to take on and addressing your past experience and involvement with gang life and criminal activity.
Yeah. So, when it comes to that, there's still people that I know that are still in that space. But it's one of those things where I tell people like, if you have a goal and say you're 100 pounds overweight and you decide you want to lose that 100 pounds, when you do the exercise and the weight starts to fall off, you just gain the ability to fit in new clothes, right? You don't have an emotional attachment and you're not angry at the old clothes that no longer fit. It's just a natural evolution. It's not like something I'm mad at, right? So using that analogy, that's how I kind of perceive like that life. I still am who I am, but my priorities changed and I lost a bunch of weight. So now the things that used to fit don't fit anymore. I naturally evolved away from that stuff, because what I'm doing and what that is, they don't go together. It doesn't fit. Those clothes don't fit. That hat doesn't fit, because I lost all that weight. I lost all that negativity, and I lost the desire and the need to be accepted by that part of my life.
Okay. Right. Thank you for sharing. I like that analogy that you use. Definitely. So now you have moved into a space. Let's talk about your children and the marriages. How do you manage to keep your relationship with your children from your first marriage? And also, let's talk about then you when and then you met. You have a wife now and a family. Let's talk about how do you balance that?
Um, it was a lot because there was a lot of back and forth. There was a lot of negative aspects to that, and so one thing I remember being focused on is that relationship with my kids,
Okay.
keeping them around me and keeping that line between them and me open, regardless what I was doing. There was times where, like, I was with one of their moms and they knew I was cheating because they would hear it, or they knew that these other things were going on.
Mm.
But I tried to keep them at the forefront of what I was doing as a father, being present at these games and in their sports and in their life. And even when I got incarcerated, talking to them on the phone, staying connected, staying a part of their lives in any way that I was able to. Um, and even after my first marriage, like my 3 kids with my first wife, we have that connection still. And even now, still, they're grown. We still communicate. We have a group chat on an iPhone,
Yeah.
where we all can communicate. It's called Pops and Us, right? Where
Yeah.
any one of them or me can put a message into that chat and all the siblings can see it and respond to it and interact in that way. And so for me, that's been, and the other thing is I haven't had the experience, there's 3 babies' moms. There's 3 mothers involved to the kids that I've raised.
Right.
And neither of them have like attacked me for child support or tried to weaponize my kids. And so I'm fortunate in that, like, regardless what was going on. And there was some times where I'm like, this is probably going to happen, but it didn't. They really helped cultivate that relationship with the kids and me, in spite of all the times where I probably didn't deserve that support from them in that space.
Yeah.
Right. Where they could have been justified in saying, fuck him, I'm keeping the kids from him. And,
Right.
those types of things, but they didn't.
Allowed you to still be a part of their lives
Yeah.
as a father. Yeah. So you were saying we talked about your kids, but I know that you are married now. Can you describe how you met Lacey and the circumstances around your meeting and or being pregnant? Other one of your children?
Yeah. So I met Lacey during like the earlier stages in my hustling, after my 11-year stint, and actually after the going back for 41 days and then getting out again.
Okay.
I met her kind of in that space of selling, and she was doing her thing, and it ended up being kind of a situation. I was still married, and then she went to prison. Well, she went to jail. She was with me. We were in a rental. They pulled us over. She took everything, right? Put whatever in her purse, and the rest wherever it went. And I was able to leave that situation unscathed, right?
Okay.
And during that time she was in jail, she called and said she was pregnant. And so I, like, that day had to tell my wife, like, I'm sure this has been going on, but now it's this.
Yeah.
And so
Definitely changed the way things were.
That started a whole thing, right? And so it was a lot. Eventually we went on to get married and had a second kid. So we have a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old, and the blending of the families has been, to say the least, an uphill at times journey, but all in all, like, it is a blended family situation.
Yeah.
There's a lot that we had to work through and put behind us to get to where we are.
Yeah. Takes some big work and some big feelings and big steps, feelings of taking care of things, and you having to lead that. That's definitely something that it's knowing that the kids are first in that. So as you were just sharing, kids are first in that. So I know there was a time where you were arrested for leading an organized crime. That was in 2016.
Yeah.
What was your feelings around that arrest?
Initially, like, I remember to put it like this, when I got arrested, I was almost relieved because it had got to the point where it was like I didn't enjoy doing what I was doing.
Right.
The financial freedom was cool, but the amount of people that I knew for a fact and had even seen and witnessed that were supposed to be really close to me that were like either stealing from me or doing something shady behind my back, or like really put pressure on me to make sure they were put on, right? Like, these types of things lived inside me and I ignored them. But I knew they were there, whether they knew I knew or not. It was what it was. So I remember when they like did the thing and I was in the back of the car, I was like, I was like, finally, I'm gonna bail out and basically use that as my way out, right? And so that's kind of what happened for a while.
Now this followed, preceding you were in 2013. You started selling pills.
Yeah.
Which then you were associated with your moving company.
Yeah. So, and that wasn't a mixture of the two,
right?
But it doesn't matter because when you're doing wrong things, they're going to paint the narrative in the way that they want. So, my first wife's father had passed. She received a settlement. Part of that settlement was used. It was like $3 or $4 grand to buy a box truck.
Yeah.
A business license is $40, and we contracted with a couple of furniture stores local, and we're doing like their furniture stuff and haulaways and house moves. This, in my mind, the money was separate. The account was separate. I was bringing in quite a bit of money on the hustle, but I was also using the moving company to put other homies in a position where they could go do these deliveries and get paid for it. So the money wasn't mixed, but they didn't see it that way. And they never even throughout the case, they never even brought up the fact that our rent was paid and that we had just received $40 grand as a married couple. They never even looked at her source of income. They just looked at the big picture and was like, yep, organized crime. You use the drug money to buy this moving company, and that's what it is.
So I have a few more questions. But do you mind if we take a pause for a second?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, we back after a quick commercial break.
Yes. Thank you. So I want to just jump back into it. We were just you were sharing your arrest that led it up to your organized crime, and you shared also about the arrest and situation around the selling of the pills and the moving company. Let's talk about what happened and some of your experience around how you were dealing with and facing the challenges of staying legal after being bailed out.
Ooh, so when I first bailed out, yeah, that was probably one of the biggest transitions in my life, right? Because I had financial freedom up to that point. And then I bailed out and it was like they froze all my accounts. My homeboy had gave me a little bit of money to help. Luckily at that point I had like paid my rent up a few months. So I had a little bit of nest egg space, and they didn't tell me I had to get out of my house. So that was another good thing. And then it was like, where am I going to work? What am I going to do? Because I haven't been doing anything but hustling, right? And they took the box truck. They took the items from the toy store. We were operating in Tacoma, and I had an online store, and they took all that stuff, watches and RC toys, and everything was gone. Accounts cleared out. So I went to a mechanic I used to know, because when I did my 11 years in prison, one of the things I did was everything they offered, right? Certification wise. So I was a certified mechanic. I did the class. Actually, that was one of the colleges I made the president's list in, the auto tech.
Awesome.
So I went and I asked the guy I used to take all my cars to, and so he gave me a job where he paid me at the end of each day. So I was doing that for a little bit, and then my cousin Calvin offered me a job where he was at. He was working at this place called Pack Walls, where they were framing walls like in a warehouse, right? And so I was doing that, and then my brother had offered to like help with my lawyer and stuff like that. So what ended up happening is I went about 11 months doing nothing, working different jobs. I ended up getting a job at Red Lion Hotel, and it was union. It paid all right. And I was using the public defender, because one thing I had learned about the system is like once you're out on bail, it's a lot easier to navigate staying out on bail.
Okay.
Right? So I kind of utilized that. And I also knew in the back of my mind that they didn't have a case, so it would kind of benefit them to keep extending my court dates.
Okay.
Them believing that I would do something to give them a case, right? And so I was leaning into these different tactics to just stay out, because I knew I was selling, but I wasn't going to plead to leading organized crime. Again, it's one of those things where it's like, hey, if you have something that I can plead to for what I did, run it. I'll do my time. But you're trying to charge me with something that has a life sentence, and I didn't do that. There's RCWs for what I did, but they were refusing to let me plead guilty to any of those.
Yes.
They wanted the leading organized crime case in that state anyway, in the county. And so after that year, I had got some money, earned enough to, what's it called, retainer a lawyer.
Retainer.
And then once I retained him, he came in and boom, started pushing the dates out 4 months at a time. But every time in between those 4 months, he wanted another chunk, not a little bit. So it was like 3 to 5 bands at a time. And all he was doing was extending the court dates. So that's where the challenges for me came. Shit just started getting real for me. The money I had saved up, the homies that were helping, the different favors I was able to pull on, people that owed me, that shit ran out.
Yeah.
And then one thing led to another, and I was like, well, I'm already facing life, and I'm out here, and if I don't pay this lawyer, I don't know what's going to happen, because like I fired a public defender, and now I have this paid lawyer who's not going to continue to be my paid lawyer if he's not paid. So that's essentially what led to my decisions in justifying getting back in the game. So I tried to dabble, and I don't do nothing half-assed. So I dabbled, and then I'm the plug again, and then I'm doing the things again, and then I got all the shit and all the stuff.
And this is when you're back selling drugs.
Yeah, and that's what the decision process making was. It's like, I got to take this dude 5 racks, so I'm gonna do just enough to get this 5 racks. But then it's like, but wait, I need 2 more because now I got to pay my rent, because I just gave him all the 5 racks I have to this lawyer. So I'm like, all right, I'll do 2 more moves. And at first it was like brokering, like I'm not touching it. I'm gonna just connect this person with this person and just get the, the profits or whatever, because he's gonna give me this price, etc. And it just turned into, now I have all the shit, and I'm doing direct exchanges again, and now I'm back to square one. Now I'm like fighting for my life while fighting for my life, and hoping to somehow not get caught this time, even though I'm on bail for already getting caught. Like it was just a vicious cycle, of trying to just survive, really.
Okay. Yeah. So How did your secret use of Molly and use of heavy marijuana consumption affect your life? Was this happening during that time?
So yeah, so there was a situation where I had like a particular access to a particular kind of Molly that was like more pure than the shit that was mixed with meth and other different things or whatever. So I justified, again, I used to always justify things to myself. Like, I gotta try it to make sure it is what he says it is. And then after I did, it was like, up to that point, I would have never identified as like an addict or having a problem with any particular substance.
Yeah.
I was always the guy who just made the money off of it. And so that was like my little skeleton in the closet, because some people knew I had done it before, but only one person on the planet knew that I was like popping one a morning whenever that, because it was seasonal.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it would only come for a certain amount of time throughout the year, this particular. And when it came, I took one every day. And when it was the weed thing, once, so I was on DLC for part of that, between 2013 and 2015 or whatever. And I got off DLC completely, paid my fines, everything. Like a month before I got off, they stopped testing for marijuana. So that was
Okay.
kind of when the state started to accept it. And once that happened, it was just like, that's what I did every day. Like, I would roll up and make blunts into a Swisher pack and just, I had them like cigarettes, right? And I know I didn't realize I had like a weed problem
Mm.
until I would, like, I remember it stood out. I woke up, it was like 9 in the morning. And weed stores, most of them at that time, I don't know about now because I don't buy weed from weed stores or anywhere. Um, they didn't open till like 10, or some of them 11.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't find no roaches. I didn't have no weed. I'm like going through every cabinet, drawer,
Mm.
car console, and halfway through that, I remember like, I feel like a crackhead. Like, and it
Mm-hmm.
was really a compelling, like, I needed to wake up and hit some weed.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I went back to sleep, got up like an hour or so later, and went straight to the weed store. I bought a grip of weed, right? And it was like, never again will I wake up and not have weed. That's when I knew. Never did I admit it until later in the feds in
Yes.
a treatment program.
Mm-hmm.
But that's when I knew. When that shit
Yeah.
it was in me. I was like, I need, like,
Yeah.
looking for the smallest piece of roach in the ashtray on the back porch. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it was,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. I like for us to talk about something that I know is pretty heavy for you. Can you describe your experience of witnessing your best friend, your brother, being shot and killed in front of you?
Um, in a lot of ways, like, it's it's still surreal, you know. That happened in 2017. It was an altercation. Uh, very few people know like the exact details behind that situation. I was right there and witnessed the thing,
Mm-hmm.
and I just remember like I was in shock for a long time. I went really cold. I was already looking at like them taking my life away, and that was he, not my wife, was my contingency plan. He was the one I was stacking money up and like, bro, when I go away, like, you got this. Like, you're gonna keep the family together. You're gonna, like, if you gotta move in the house with your kids, like, do what you gotta do. Like, we had this whole plan worked out. Like, we knew I was going away. Like, we were planning for it. So every time I had a court date and the lawyer would push it out, it was like, all right, we got 4 more months. Let's get this money, put this up. This
Yeah.
is what the plan. Like, that was the
Yeah.
only person on the planet I could trust. And when he passed, it was like, it was hard for me to stay connected to anything. Like, it was hard for me to, like, I knew I had to be there for my kids, but I also knew I was going away soon. I knew I had these relationships I was trying to navigate, and I knew like I was in a game and I was like responsible for these other people that expected me to be this role and put people on and be this type of person in their life. And I didn't give a fuck. Like there were times where I knew people were like using me, and I would just drain my money by saying yes, just so I didn't have it to say yes. Like it was like I didn't give a fuck. Motherfucker like, hey man, I need rent for this, or hey man, so and so just got locked up. His bail's like $5,000. I'm like, here, whatever. All right, I got you. You know, here. And yeah, I gave up on like really being myself. And it was because I'm comfortable with a plan, and I'm even more comfortable with a backup plan, right? When my backup plan literally got killed to how I felt like I could keep what I had built,
Yes.
then I didn't know what to do next.
Kind of like part of your empire was no longer there to help you to build.
Yeah, it was you know, and even to this day, going to his grave is tough.
Yeah. So what did you do? How did you cope with it? How did you cope with the depression and navigate these multiple relationships during this period? And that time too, you were also going into having to deal with CPS attempts, or your child being impacted with you and Lacey, and the substance use and on the intervention. How did you first talk about, how did you deal with that before you move and talk about CPS?
I didn't really deal with it. Like I just it was just something that was part of what was happening, and I compartmentalized, disassociated, you know, smoked. I'm not a drinker, but I remember drinking a lot more in those times. And the relationship thing, it was more like I was hollow. Like I don't remember, except for like anger or passion for like something going on with one of my kids. I can't really look back and say I had very strong feelings. I was on like whatever type of mode. Like you know, someone would come into my space and whatever, whatever, whatever. I was with whatever. It wasn't until, you know, the music kind of started to get involved. But yeah, I can't honestly say looking back that I was coping. I was just existing in that space, and all these things, my homeboy dying every time within like a 30-day period of the next court date. It was the most stress and pressure because my lawyer would always say he didn't know if they were going to agree to the next extension. So it's like every 4 months or so, it was like, is this the week that they're like, nope, we're going to trial and here's your trial dates. Right. Yes. So there's a couple times where I got witness lists and they were long as fuck. And I'm like, I don't even know these people because they were preparing for trial. Then we get to that court date and he'd be like, yeah, they do want to extend. So I was just living in like survival mode. So the money I spent was like even with my kids, it was about memories. Like I was just doing this extravagant shit. You know,
So when all this was happening, how did the CPS attempts and the removal of the kids impact you and Lacey, and Lacey's substance use? How did that all impact you, and what happened with it?
So, to be honest, looking back, it wasn't necessarily her substance use that was the cause for the CPS involvement, because they tried already. What had happened was our son had some medical issues, and I guess in a roundabout way you could say it was her substance use, but it was during a time where I was working the two jobs, at the warehouse and then at the Red Lion Hotel at like more in the evening times, and she had missed some doctor's appointments, right? And so that was their way in. because Achilles, our youngest son, needed to have these doctor's appointments. He was born with what they call asphyxia or something like that, where basically when he drank, some of the fluid was like going into his breathing space. And this was as a baby, right? And he had a breathing machine and asthma apparatuses and things like that. And she would miss appointments and then reschedule them, and then miss them and then reschedule them, or miss them by like a minute. And they're like, things like that. But what they did was they allowed it to get to a point where it was like 6 or 7 missed appointments, and then they swooped in and were like, "Oh, this is what we needed," type deal. And it's like, why not at 2 did you not call the parent that is considered the protective parent? Which led me to theories that they wanted to take the kids, because had they called me, I would have dropped what I was doing or whatever and made these appointments. Had they said, just like when they said, well, you have 2 jobs and she's home with the kids, so they considered that to be grounds for them to lean in. And I was like, all right, I'll quit the day one then. And I did. So now I'm home with the kids. So now what? Right? So it was just their ways. They wanted them.
Right.
They wanted this to be part of their case. And I know that because when they raided, they came with CPS. Like what's it called? They collaborated.
Okay.
To make sure that the kids took the same time that they were doing this raid on my house. So
okay.
It all made sense, but it was later on that it made sense that this was all part of the bigger picture for them coming after me. So, in some ways it was my fault, right? And others, she could have got clean and done what she needed to do in that time. But as we all know, recovery happens when it happens.
When it happens. Yes.
Right?
Yeah. I know you have a musical emblem on. What inspired you? Now we talk about that music in your life when you were traveling to Vegas. What inspired you to start music?
So this particular music note is actually it has Block's ashes in it, and that's also what inspired it. Was so after he had passed, my brother from another mother, Brad Leone, picked up his entire studio, drove from Vegas to my house, and was basically like I know where your head's at. I'm not leaving while you got all this going on, and you just lost Brody. I'm here, bro. Like it is what it is, and I brought my studio because I'm parked. I'm staying here. I'm about to help you get through this because I know where you're gonna go if somebody don't stop you.
Powerful.
So with that studio, he not only brought his studio, he brought his producer. So he packed up a whole grown ass man with him at his studio, and he came to my house in Washington from Vegas and was like, "Yo, like I know what's going on. I know you ain't gonna talk about it." And he convinced me to do one song. He's like, "Just do a song for Block," and that led to another song because I had done music my whole time down. I had boxes of lyrics, and then when I got out, he had spent 5 years trying to convince me to get into the music industry because I would call him and spit those or whatever, and I didn't. I was too caught up in the game and all the different things I was doing. I was just like, nah, I think I'm up. I don't need that music shit. You know what I mean? And so he brought it to me.
Yeah.
Where it was super convenient. And so I started doing music. It turned into music videos, reality show, like all different things. And that was because of Brad like really caring for me as a person and like what I was going through.
Yeah, that was something probably that really helped support you as you were talking about with things that help cope, maybe not even realizing it at the time too. Now, like you were sharing, you look back and you see all these things in your life, those pieces that really help support you. That music was maybe a big part of a source of supporting you.
No, it was because those songs, they're still out. And those songs literally was telling the story, like the CPS stuff. There was a point in time where my wife was like, "You're a cheater, you're a liar, you're da 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 da," and I got so tired of hearing it that I did a song called Airing It Out. And I told on myself for all the things I was doing wrong in my relationships, right?
Okay.
And I put all of my life into those songs. So like if you were to listen to those older songs on the Before I Grew Up Lost Tracks album, you'll hear the whole story all the way up until I got incarcerated.
Okay. Wow. I'm gonna check that out. So now we're here. Let's talk about how did you prepare for airing the reality show that you're starring in and getting your independence from after the arrest?
So basically that was all part of like the music stuff. This was Bread's homeboy. He was a manager. He also managed Raz B from B2K, and like there was a lot of intermingling with that. And they offered this opportunity to be on an episode of like a 8 episode series of a reality show in Vegas called Vegas Social. And so one of the things I let them know off the rip, I'm like, I'm not faking no fights. I'm not like I'm not doing a reality show that's not reality. Like if we're doing an episode, what do I got to do to be a producer and maintain my authenticity? And so I paid in to do that. I became the producer on that episode, and the stuff that we shot again was my life that I was living at the time. So it wasn't faked, scripted, or none of that. It was really what was going on at the time. And we all knew. So there's even a scene in that show with me like talking to my lawyer and talking to my kids on FaceTime back in Washington when I was in Vegas about the transition and stuff. And
Because
then
at this time, sorry, you were still pending arrest and all those things was
I
happening.
was on bail.
You were bail. Okay.
So yeah, I was going out of state when I was on bail and probably shouldn't have been, all the things. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So can you discuss the curriculum? Let's move and talk about what you're doing now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you've been writing and this curriculum has been not just this one, but can you talk a little bit more about the curriculum you wrote while you were in prison?
All right. So COVID hit.
Yeah.
And pretty much right before that I had been penning this idea of a curriculum for reentry, and I came up with the acronym A Better Place. Now, PLACE was Pursuing Life After Crime Education. That's what the acronym stood for. And I created this 80-something page 4-part interactive instructional kind of like a hybrid between like a group you can facilitate and an interactive learning situation. And the reentry specialist at SeaTac Federal Holding Facility caught wind of it, helped me develop it. I sent it home to a friend's mom who typed it and sent it back in. And then I was administering these groups while I was fighting my case, not realizing this would even help my case. Like it wasn't until months later where I was talking about doing this in a session with my lawyer that he was like, yo, I can use that as a downward departure. Forward me all that. Tell me what reentry person you're working with so I can contact them. He's like, this is really good for you, especially that you didn't know that it would help with your sentencing. And I was like, yeah, it came to me. I want to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And this is at the time where you were fighting your sentence, your 10-year sentence?
No, this was the last time I was incarcerated.
Okay.
So when I was on bail from 2016 until 2019,
Okay.
2019, I was arrested by the feds.
Okay.
And so all of that leading organized crime charge kind of got swept up into a Fed charge.
Okay. Okay. And then that's when you then got experience with the therapeutic community in California prisons.
Yeah.
When you went down there.
Yeah. So from there, I was sentenced to 90 months. And in the feds, there's a program. It's in the state, it's called TC, just therapeutic community. In the feds, it's called RDAP. And if you're eligible, you can take RDAP, and it also removes an extra year off your sentence on top of your good time. And it could come with an additional year of halfway house time. So essentially, 2 years would come off your sentence if you do this program and complete it. They told me I wasn't eligible at first for the time off, so I still did the program.
Okay.
And then found out later that not only was I eligible for the year off, I got a year halfway house. And then the First Step Act, which passed in 2018, gave me 10 more months off my sentence. So my 90-month sentence had me at the halfway house in 47 months.
Okay. So that's when you were released to the federal way house in 2022.
Yeah, December of 2022.
Okay. And so, and that's how the release. Talk a little bit more how that impact your reentry process.
So it was actually really helpful. So a lot of people don't know, and why I'm passionate about reentry and the programs that I work on now is because I knew when I got my release date official, I knew I had a job. Caleb already had me a job. My little brother had been talking about a job lined up. He already told me I could live with him because at the time, me and Lacey we weren't talking about being together. We were still legally married, but getting back together wasn't the conversation we were having. And so I was planning to get out to my little brother's house in Tacoma, use his car until I could get one. One of my other best friends, we call him Mama's Boy for the longest time, said he had a car, but it just needed to be fixed. It was sitting for a while, and that he would just give it to me and sign it over. So there was things that I already knew. So going to the halfway house, once I got there, it was just a matter of like, are these things really there, right?
Yes.
And when they were, I just acted on them. I took the job with Caleb immediately as soon as the halfway house approved my passes to go work. My license was still good because I wasn't gone long enough. So I got insurance and was able to use my brother's car. He brought it to the halfway house and let me borrow it. And so like the halfway house really allowed for that type of transition because of COVID, they weren't charging money to live there. So I was able to really just focus on what I needed to do to put myself in a position.
So let's talk about the process of you and Lacey rekindling your relationship and starting the community work.
So our relationship probably officially started the day she picked me up from the airport. So up until that point, she had been like we could be friends and we could be cordial and it is what it is, and she agreed to be the person that picked me up from SeaTac when I got there.
Okay. So when you got out and landed back here in the state.
When I landed back in the state. So like up until that point, like she was fighting to get our kids back. They were living with my mom. There was some stuff going on. Yeah. And so, yeah, she wasn't forthcoming with she wasn't embracing the idea of us having a relationship, when I came home.
Yeah.
And so when I got off the plane and then we got back to the halfway house, I was thinking it would be like a blackout phase and, it would be a process. And so, I drove home or I drove there and then the counselor was like, you know what, just go ahead and go home for 4 hours. And when you come back, we'll do all this orientation stuff, man. Go see your family. Because I got there December 22nd. So we're like 3 days away from Christmas, right? And so he let me do that. And when we went to the house, you know what I mean?
Family
grown up stuff happened. And it was just more of a conversation about you got to be willing to admit you don't know who I am today. And she was, at that time I think just had got a state job. She secured a dope house. So everything was hers. And it's like when I left, everything was in my name. I was the sole breadwinner, right? And so just being it, and I think being at the halfway house, since you kind of asked that question, I think it helped more than anything that transition of really deciding what my role was going to look like, where I was going to really get in. And then the community work. So the moving company Caleb had me working for, I don't know if you ever dealt with moving companies, but they're seasonal kind of when it comes to how much work they get.
Yes,
So there's
especially here in Washington.
so there's a point in time where he's like, "You're not on the schedule. You're not on the schedule." And then somebody on Facebook had invited me down to Pier Olympia,
Hmm.
and then down there, and I had already was working on my prerequisites for the CPC stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and this person was like, introduced me to the Recovery Coach Academy. I'm like, "What is that?" They're like, "Oh, it's this week-long class. You get this cert." I'm like, "A cert? Recovery Coach Academy? I don't got nothing to do. I don't want to sit at the halfway house." So I'm like, "Bet." I just said, "Yeah," right? So I did that. So
Mm-hmm.
while I did that is kind of how I cultivated the relationship with
Mm-hmm.
Pure Olympia and got to know like that process and what that looked like. And then jobs started picking back up. But at that point, I had already felt like I'm not going to do labor. It's not my passion. I'd already started the Pursue It If You Want It. I went through the process of making the business license and got that all approved with the halfway house and was working on my logos and everything I had worked on inside. I was already taking the steps,
Okay.
building it up, thinking this is what I'm going to do. And
Okay.
so there was times where I had 20 hoodies delivered to the halfway house and they were all pre-sold, for the Pursue It If You Want It, Reach for Your Dreams stuff. And
And that happened while you were sorry,
at
because
the
I want to
halfway
make
house.
sure we don't just
Yeah.
let's go over that. Talk a little bit about that. How did that come to fruition?
So that was a blueprint that I worked on in prison. So for me, a lot of people don't understand, like, yeah, I've been out 18 months, right? And they'll look and they'll watch my feed and they'll say, "Oh, I'm so proud. You're doing all these amazing things. And you did it in such a short time." And I'm like, "No, I didn't." Because, and it's funny because even my wife, when we were having those first conversations, she's like, "People don't just change overnight." I'm like, "You're right. I was gone for 4 years. It wasn't overnight, right?" I tell people often, like, I set myself free while I was in prison, even from the politics in there. I started focusing on my vision, writing out what Pursue It If You Want It was going to look like as a nonprofit, writing out
Yeah.
what my curriculum was going to be, what my mission was going to be.
Yeah.
And my goal was to get back in the prisons with this stuff as someone who had been successful in reentry and all that.
Yes. And then the name.
So Pursue It If You Want It. Those of you that have followed my music career from before, it was actually the slogan underneath my rap name. It was always, for me, it was a way of life, right? Because I used to really get in my feelings when people would say like, "Oh, things will work themselves out." I used to be like, "No, the fuck they won't. Like, you got to put in the work. What do you mean? If you want something, you got to pursue it." And it just became like a part of me.
Yeah.
So when I started thinking about a name for this nonprofit that I was going to create and be a part of and push out, I was thinking of also something that would go with me as a person, but also something that people could really, really relate to. And it's like, you know what? Pursue it if you want it, man. All day, every day. So
Yes.
both of these names are registered under the nonprofit. It's Pursue It If You Want It, and it's Pursue It 365. Right? That's what that is on these hats.
Yes.
It's pursue it every day. Whatever it is, just if you take one step every day towards a goal or towards a dream, that's 365 steps that you've taken in the year.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah. I have a couple more questions for you. So, what are your hopes and aspirations for the future? Excuse
me. Really, I'm focused on the present. And the reason why I say that is because, the past is gone, the future is the future, right? Right now I'm doing what I want to be doing. Um, being able to go into prisons and train certified peer counselors. What y'all don't know is we just trained together for the first time inside of Walla Walla State Penitentiary.
Amazing.
And it's amazing. There's no more rewarding type of career. So that old adage where you hear like, you're not working if you love what you do, right? This doesn't feel like a job.
Yes.
And
No, it
so
doesn't.
if I'm gonna answer the question is if I'm doing this in the
Mhm.
future, then I'm good.
Mhm. What message would you like to share with another and others who are struggling with similar issues?
Pursue it if you want it, right?
Yeah.
But also when you're ready, there's support out here. When you're ready to take those steps, nobody can recover for you. And people that are in this space where we're at,
Yeah.
we know that. So when people are getting that help, it's because they come and they ask for it. We'll meet you where you're at. But seek support, seek help, but also ask yourself, be genuinely curious with yourself. Like, are
Mm.
you ready
Yes.
for the next step of your
Yes.
life? Are you ready to pursue what you might tell your friends and your family that you want, but you haven't coincided that want with your actions? When you're ready to move into the preparation stage of change and actions, then seek help. Nobody is self made. Everything I've ever done involves some form of collaboration.
Yeah. Wow. What's the final that you want to leave right now?
Write your own narrative, right?
Mm.
Don't let somebody else tell you who you are,
Yes.
what you're able to do or not do. And I challenge you to try to think of it with two questions. And I actually use this in our training today, right? By whose authority, and take me to your leader, right? These are two ways that you can really challenge when somebody is trying to oppress you with their narrative. Set yourself free because it's by your own authority and your
Yes.
own agreement wherever you are in life. It's because you agree that that's where you deserve to be. Whatever you identify as is your agreement. If someone else is giving you the narrative and saying you're this, you're that, you're this, you're that, if you agree with them, then you are. But if you don't, you take away that authority and you can reclaim that and write your own narrative for yourself and be who you want to be, do what you want to do.
Now to drop the mic.
Drop the mic.